He said it wouldn't hurt, but it did. 6 words, whispered by a terrified child to Florida's most dangerous man. Words that matched exactly what his dying brother spoke 20 years ago. Words that would tear down an empire and make an entire city hold its breath. Little Piper stood trembling on a Miami side street, her pink dress torn, clutching a stuffed bear with one missing ear. Behind her, Senator Rex Thorne, Florida's golden boy. The face on election posters, the man who shook hands at charity galas, was dragging her sister toward a black SUV with tinted windows. Silvio, the curator, Volpe, had seen violence, built his fortune on it, survived by making calculated decisions that kept him invisible, untouchable. Exactly the kind of man who walks past trouble that isn't his business. But something stopped him cold. Maybe it was the little girl's terror. Maybe it was the way the senator's security turned their backs, complicit in broad daylight. Maybe it was the ghost of his brother Darian that never quite left him. 3 broken bones and 2 unconscious bodyguards later, Senator Thorne fled. But it was 6-year-old Piper who changed everything. She looked up at this tattooed stranger everyone called a monster. This man with slicked hair, neck tattoos crawling beneath his designer suit, silver chains catching Miami sun. This man whose reputation made politicians sweat and rivals disappear. And she whispered those 6 words that shattered everything Silvio had spent 20 years building. He said it wouldn't hurt, but it did. Silvio's blood turned to ice. Those exact words, identical to what 8-year-old Darian spoke right before the predator their mother trusted, destroyed him. Right before 16-year-old Silvio chose the smart path calculated revenge over immediate action. Right before his brother died waiting for Silvio's perfect plan that came too late. Piper wasn't just another victim. She was Silvio's second chance. His redemption delivered in a pink dress and curly hair, offering him the choice he'd failed 20 years ago. Act now and lose everything, or plan perfectly and risk losing her forever. What Silvio didn't know yet. Senator Thorne was protected by Chief Justice Alistair Cade, the same corrupt official who'd sealed Darian's case 2 decades earlier. The same man who'd built Florida's most impenetrable shield around predators, trading children's safety for political leverage. To save Piper, Silvio would have to wage war against the very system he'd spent 20 years bribing to stay invisible. He'd have to become the monster everyone already believed him to be, and he'd have to do it in a way that made the whole city go silent. Real quick, drop your location in the comments. Let's see where this story reaches today. Now, back to that afternoon on Brickell Avenue, when a crime lord's carefully controlled world collided with a 6-year-old's desperate courage. Miami's Brickell Avenue, where glass towers scrape a cloudless sky and power is brokered in whispers sanitized by lawyers. Where money flows like the bay beyond, and violence wears expensive cologne. Silvio the curator. Volpe didn't look like Florida's most feared financial fixer. He looked like a hedge fund CEO who closed deals over 18-year scotch, which was precisely the point. At 42, with neck tattoos hidden beneath custom-tailored black suits and silver chains catching afternoon light, Silvio had mastered the art of controlling Florida's shadow economy without appearing to touch it. Developers paid him consulting fees to avoid construction delays. Nightclub owners hired his security to prevent health inspections. Politicians accepted his campaign contributions to forget certain zoning violations. He didn't sell drugs, didn't run guns, didn't order hits. Silvio traded in something more valuable: the appearance of legitimacy purchased through systematic corruption. A financial architect who made dirty money look clean and dangerous people look respectable. This Tuesday should have been routine. Another meeting with developers who'd never admit they just paid protection money disguised as consulting fees. Another envelope, another compromised official added to his ledger. But on a side street near Bayfront Park, where tourists snap photos and locals hurry past without looking, Silvio saw something that violated his cardinal rule. Never get involved in business that isn't yours. Senator Rex Thorne, 48, tanned, perfectly positioned teeth that appeared on every campaign billboard, was dragging a young woman toward a black SUV. A little girl in a pink dress screamed behind them, her voice cutting through Miami traffic like broken glass. Silvio's instinct said, "Walk away." This wasn't his territory. These weren't his people. Getting involved with elected officials violated everything he'd built his survival on. Stay in shadows. Control from distance. Never expose yourself to unnecessary risk. His bodyguards tensed, reading his hesitation. They knew their boss. 26 years in Florida's criminal underworld, and Silvio had never once acted on impulse, never once let emotion override calculation. But Silvio saw details others missed, the practiced way Thorne's security team positioned themselves to block sightlines. The desperate way the young woman clawed at the senator's grip, the absolute terror in the little girl's eyes. Terror Silvio recognized because he'd worn it himself at 8 years old, when monsters wore friendly faces and nobody believed him. The decision crystallized in a heartbeat. Silvio's bodyguards barely had time to react before their boss was moving. Not the careful, calculated movements of a crime lord orchestrating from safety. The direct, brutal movements of someone who'd learned to fight in back alleys before he learned to delegate violence. The confrontation was swift and savage. 2 bodyguards fell, one with a dislocated shoulder, one unconscious before he hit pavement. Thorne's face transformed from entitled arrogance to genuine fear, as this tattooed stranger in a $3,000 suit dismantled his security like they were cardboard. "Touch them again," Silvio said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. "And I'll make you wish I was just a criminal." Senator Thorne fled, but not before snarling threats about destruction and consequences, and not knowing who he was dealing with. Oh, Silvio knew exactly who he was dealing with. Men like Thorne always underestimated men like Silvio, always assumed their positions protected them from consequences. They were about to learn different. The young woman Vera, 23, exhausted eyes that told stories of working 3 jobs, collapsed against a wall. She tried to thank him through tears, tried to explain about the weeks of stalking, the gifts, the promises that tonight had finally revealed themselves as threats. But Silvio barely heard her. Because 6-year-old Piper had approached him directly, walking past his bodyguards like they were furniture, stopping close enough to touch his sleeve. She looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. Eyes that had seen things children should never see. Eyes that recognized something in him, perhaps the same pain she carried. And she whispered 6 words that detonated every emotional wall Silvio had spent 2 decades building. He said it wouldn't hurt. But it did. The Miami sun felt too hot. The street, too loud. Silvio's vision tunneled until all he could see was this little girl speaking his brother's last words. Words Darian had spoken at 8 years old, describing what the trusted family friend had done. Words Silvio heard right before he'd promised revenge. Planned perfectly. Waited patiently for the exact right moment to strike. And Darian died before Silvio's calculated vengeance could be executed. Died waiting for his older brother to save him. Died because Silvio had chosen smart over fast, strategy over heart. Now here stood another little girl, another desperate plea, another impossible choice between the calculated path that might save Silvio's empire and the reckless path that might save her life. 20 years ago, Silvio chose wrong. He chose the smart play, the perfect plan, the revenge that would be surgically precise and legally protected. And his brother paid with his life. This time would be different. It had to be. Even if it cost Silvio everything he'd built. Even if it meant becoming the monster Florida already believed him to be. What Silvio didn't know, not yet, not in that moment, was that saving Piper would mean destroying the very corruption network he'd spent 20 years paying to protect himself. It would mean exposing the secrets of men far more powerful than Senator Thorne. It would mean warfare against Chief Justice Alistair Cade, the architect of Florida's most impenetrable shield around predators. The same man who'd sealed Darian's case 20 years ago. If you've ever felt powerless against a system designed to protect the powerful instead of the innocent, this story is for you. If you believe some debts can only be paid with everything you have, stay with me. Because what Silvio Volpe does next will either redeem his soul or destroy his life. Probably both. And if you're watching quietly without subscribing, don't be like the system that stays silent when the innocent need defenders. When the system designed to protect children instead protects their abusers. When the law becomes a weapon against the innocent. When badges and gavels shield monsters while prosecuting heroes. What would you risk to do what's right? Your freedom? Your empire? Your life? Silvio Volpe is about to find out exactly how much redemption costs, and whether a man who spent 20 years in shadows can step into the light without burning everything he's ever built. Silvio's hands moved before his bodyguards could react. The first security guard went down with a dislocated shoulder. The second crumpled unconscious against the SUV's chrome bumper. Skills forged in back-alley fights before Silvio learned to buy violence instead of delivering it personally. Senator Thorne stumbled backward, his polished facade cracking into genuine fear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled, already retreating toward his vehicle. "I'll destroy you. I'll bury you so deep. Try," Silvio said quietly. The single word carried more threat than any speech. Thorne fled, tires squealing as his SUV peeled away from the curb. His remaining security scrambled after him, leaving Vera collapsed against a wall, trembling violently. She was 23 but looked older. Exhaustion carved into her features from working 3 jobs, raising her 6-year-old sister alone since their mother's cancer death 18 months ago. The words tumbled out between sobs, weeks of stalking, expensive gifts appearing at her workplace, Thorne's promises to help them, to take care of everything if she'd just trust him. Tonight he'd tried to make good on those promises. His version of help involved a beach house and no witnesses. Silvio's lieutenant approached with a first aid kit, but Silvio wasn't listening anymore, because Piper had walked directly up to him, this tattooed stranger who'd just committed felony assault in broad daylight, and looked up with eyes that held too much knowledge for 6 years. He said it wouldn't hurt. But it did. The Miami street disappeared. Silvio was 16 again, holding 8-year-old Darian as his brother whispered those exact words, describing what the family friend, the man their mother trusted, the man who took Darian fishing, had done in the basement while Silvio was at school. Silvio had promised revenge, had spent 3 months planning the perfect retaliation that would be untraceable, legally bulletproof, absolutely certain. Darian died waiting. Overdosed on their mother's pills because the pain was too much and help was taking too long. Not again. Silvio installed Vera and Piper in one of his secure properties, a penthouse in Coral Gables, with reinforced doors and sightlines his security team could monitor. Then he made the call that set his intelligence network into motion. Within 6 hours, the file landed on his desk. 43 pages that made his blood freeze. Senator Rex Thorne had been hunting for 8 years. Always the same profile. Vulnerable families, usually sisters, mothers working service industry jobs who couldn't afford to lose their lifeline. He'd offer financial help, position himself as savior, build dependency. Then, he'd isolate the children. 7 documented cases across Florida, all sealed or disappeared before prosecution, all buried by the same judicial signature. Chief Justice Alistair Cade, Marcus Silvio's lieutenant and former FBI investigator, dropped the final page on the desk. His voice was careful, knowing what this would cost his boss. Cade was the judge who sealed your brother's case 20 years ago. Same pattern, same protection network, same system. Silvio stared at Cade's signature, that familiar flourish he remembered from Darian's file. The judge who'd ruled the family friend's confession inadmissible on technicalities, who'd sealed the case to protect the minor's privacy, who'd sent Darian home to the same house, the same monster, with legal protection. Silvio had 2 choices. Use his criminal network for immediate, violent justice, the kind that leaves bodies in the Everglades. Or try the legal system that had failed his brother. He remembered Darian's eyes, full of betrayal when Silvio explained they needed to wait, to build the perfect case, to be smart about revenge. His brother had died waiting for smart. Silvio reached for his phone and called federal prosecutor Elena Vargas, known for refusing bribes and surviving 3 assassination attempts because of it. He began feeding her evidence through anonymous channels. For 2 weeks, it worked beautifully. Vargas opened investigations. Subpoenas were issued. Witnesses started talking. Former victims found courage. Then Chief Justice Cade made his move, and Silvio realized he'd underestimated how deep the corruption ran. Prosecutor Vargas called from a blocked number at 2 a.m. Her voice shook in a way that told Silvio everything before she spoke. Someone left my daughter's school schedule on my husband's windshield. Photos of her walking home. The message was clear. Silence stretched between them. I'm closing the investigation. I'm sorry. The retaliation came in waves. Vera was fired from all 3 jobs within 24 hours, the restaurant, the cleaning service, the overnight stocking shift. Her landlord, who owned the building through a shell company Silvio's people traced back to Cade's network, filed eviction proceedings. CPS received an anonymous tip about neglectful parenting and opened an investigation that could remove Piper from Vera's custody entirely. Then Cade came for Silvio directly. Federal auditors descended on his legitimate businesses. His accountant vanished, later found in the Bahamas with a sudden retirement and an offshore account. His lawyer received visitors who didn't show badges but didn't need to. The message was surgical and unmistakable. Marcus spread the intelligence across Silvio's desk. Cade didn't just protect Thorne, he built an entire machine. Cops, CPS workers, judges, prosecutors, all positioned or compromised. The system isn't broken, boss. It's working exactly as designed. The meeting with Cade happened through intermediaries in a downtown law office. The Chief Justice didn't attend personally, but his message came through crystal clear on speakerphone. You're good at what you do, Volpe. Financial crimes, corruption, money laundering. That's your lane. Stay in it. Thorne is untouchable. Walk away. Or I'll dismantle everything you've built, brick by brick. That night, Silvio drove to Woodlawn Cemetery for the first time in a decade. He knelt at Darian's grave and told his brother everything about the choice he'd made 20 years ago, about the guilt that had transformed him into someone who controlled everything because he'd once controlled nothing. About this impossible chance at redemption delivered in a pink dress and curly hair. Silvio made a decision that terrified him. He was going to do the stupid, emotional, reckless thing his brother had needed him to do 2 decades ago. He was going to trust someone. Detective Anna Phillips met Silvio in a parking garage at midnight. Her internal affairs badge clipped to her belt like a warning. She listened to everything: Cade's protection network, Thorne's 8-year pattern, the systematic burial of cases. She didn't interrupt once. When Silvio finished, Anna's response was brutally honest. "I believe every word. I can't help you." She leaned against her unmarked sedan. "I've tried investigating Cade before. Twice. My cases got reassigned to friendlier detectives. My witnesses recanted statements. My evidence disappeared from secure lockers. He doesn't just own the system, he is the system." But she pulled out a folder anyway. Inside were her own findings. Shell companies laundering Cade's payments, offshore accounts, a list of compromised officials spanning 6 counties. He's running a statewide network, protects predators in exchange for political leverage and blackmail material. It's brilliant, disgusting, and completely untouchable through normal channels. Anna closed the folder. The only way to break this is complete exposure. Not a case that can be buried in motions and sealed hearings. A scandal so public, so devastating, that even Cade's protections can't hold. Silvio understood immediately what she was offering. Validation that his intelligence was accurate. Confirmation that going public was the only path forward. It would destroy everything he'd built. His shadow empire required invisibility. This would make him the most exposed man in Florida. Marcus's call came as Silvio was driving back. "We've got a problem. Thorne's preparing to leave the country in 72 hours. Cade expedited adoption paperwork through family court. If those documents process, Piper becomes legally Thorne's daughter. He can take her anywhere, and will have no legal standing to stop him. 72 hours to dismantle a corruption network that took decades to construct. 72 hours before a 6-year-old girl disappeared forever into a predator's custody with the law's blessing. Silvio made the call that would either save Piper or destroy him completely, probably both. Silvio's network mobilized like a wartime operation. Hackers penetrated sealed court records. Former victims were located and interviewed despite years of hiding. Shell companies were traced through 12 layers of corporate protection. Every payment, every buried case, every compromised official, documented, with timestamps and bank records. Simultaneously, Silvio dismantled his own empire piece by piece. He liquidated properties to fund the investigation, knowing this wealth would never be recovered. He severed ties with associates to protect them from Cade's retaliation. He shuttered legitimate businesses that gave Cade leverage points. Marcus watched his boss destroy 20 years of work in 72 hours and finally exploded. "This is insane. Just kill them. Thorne and Cade both. I know people who can make them disappear so completely their own mothers won't find bodies. We go back to business." "No." Silvio's voice was flat. "I murder my way out of this. I become exactly what everyone believes I am. Piper grows up, knowing the man who saved her is a killer. More than that, Darian hadn't needed revenge. He'd needed someone willing to stand in the light and fight the system that protected his abuser. Rebecca Suarez, veteran investigative journalist who'd survived 2 assassination attempts, agreed to publish if Silvio delivered irrefutable proof. He did, by arranging the impossible. Through intermediaries, Silvio proposed a meeting with Cade. A negotiation, Piper's transfer to Thorne in exchange for Silvio's empire remaining intact and his silence guaranteed. Cade, believing he'd won, appeared personally to finalize terms. Silvio recorded everything. Cade's explanation of his protection network, his bragging about sealed cases spanning 2 decades, his detailed description of the system that shielded predators for profit and power. The Chief Justice's arrogance became a confession that no lawyer could explain away. Silvio left that meeting with exactly what he needed to destroy Cade completely. Then Marcus called. Thorne accelerated. He's taking Piper tonight. Private jet, fueling at Opalaka, right now. Silvio remembered Darian's eyes, waiting for the perfect plan that came too late. This time, he chose his heart. Silvio's convoy rolled into Opalaka Executive Airport like a parade. 6 black vehicles, no attempt at subtlety. He wanted witnesses. Needed them. Thorne's SUV idled beside a sleek private jet, engines already warming. Cade's security formed a professional perimeter, positioned for legal complications and paperwork delays. Not for a criminal kingpin arriving with a motorcade and camera crews Rebecca Suarez had tipped off 30 minutes earlier. Silvio stepped out. Designer suit, neck tattoos visible, silver chains catching the runway lights. He walked across the tarmac in full view of airport security cameras, media zoom lenses, and Thorne's increasingly panicked security team. Senator Thorne emerged from the SUV, Piper's small hand gripped in his. You're finished, Volpe. Interfering with legal custody. Trespassing on federal property. Silvio pulled out his phone and went live. 50,000 followers. Then 100,000 as the stream spread. Florida's Chief Justice Alistair Cade is trafficking children for political leverage. Silvio announced to the cameras, to arriving police cruisers, to the social media audience watching a crime lord transform into whistleblower in real time. Senator Rex Thorne is a serial predator. The evidence is uploading to multiple servers right now. Rebecca Suarez at the Miami Herald has the full package. You can't bury this. The whole city is watching. His thumb hit send. Documented proof of Cade's protection network, Thorne's pattern spanning 8 years. The recorded confession delivered simultaneously to journalists, federal prosecutors, the FBI, and 200,000 social media users. The machinery of exposure became unstoppable. FBI vehicles screamed onto the tarmac. Federal agents swarmed Thorne. Others peeled away toward downtown, where Cade would be enjoying dinner. Completely unaware his world was ending, Silvio knelt beside Piper in the SUV's back seat, still live streaming. You're safe now. I promise. His voice cracked. And this time, I kept my promise fast enough. Florida went silent. Not from violence or fear. From witnessing a monster, choose redemption over survival. If you're still here and haven't subscribed yet, don't break the promise of supporting stories that fight for the innocent. The federal investigation that followed was unprecedented in scope. Cade's network unraveled as cooperating witnesses freed from fear by his arrest provided testimony that spanned 2 decades. Thorne's predation was exposed across 4 states. 14 sealed cases were reopened. Families who disappeared into witness protection or simply vanished from shame began resurfacing, finding voices they'd been denied. But Silvio's exposure came with consequences that hit like hurricanes. His criminal empire collapsed within 48 hours. Rivals seized territory he'd controlled for 20 years. Federal prosecutors offered the deal he'd expected: full cooperation against Cade's network in exchange for reduced charges on his own crimes. 6 months in federal custody followed. Silvio testified in 17 trials, each one dismantling another layer of institutional corruption. He lost everything. Assets seized, businesses shuttered, associates scattered across 3 countries to avoid their own prosecutions. The man who'd controlled Florida's shadow economy from behind mahogany desks now sat in witness boxes, publicly confessing to money laundering, corruption, extortion, burning down the system that had protected monsters while he'd paid for invisibility. Detective Anna visited him the day before his sentencing hearing. You know they're making an example of you. Cooperating witness or not, you're still going to prison. Silvio nodded. He'd accepted this months ago. Piper's safe. That's what matters. Anna slid a folder across the metal table. Inside was a letter from the federal prosecutor handling Darian's reopened case, the one Cade had sealed 20 years ago. New evidence uncovered during the investigation had led to charges. Darian's abuser would finally face trial. Your brother's case would never have been reopened if you hadn't detonated Cade's network, Anna said quietly. You didn't just save Piper. You saved every victim Cade buried for 2 decades. Silvio stared at Darian's case file, seeing his brother's name in official documents that finally called him victim instead of troubled youth. Sometimes redemption costs everything. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists lined the back wall. Federal observers filled the gallery. But the front rows held an unexpected audience: victims. Families Thorne had terrorized. Children Cade's network had failed. Witnesses whose cases had been buried for years. And Vera, holding Piper's hand, the federal judge, a woman who'd presided over corruption cases for 23 years, acknowledged Silvio's cooperation, but spoke with measured authority. Justice requires accountability. Your testimony dismantled a criminal enterprise that destroyed lives, but you also built an empire on corruption. Silvio, the curator Volpe, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, reduced from a potential life sentence, but significant enough to send an unmistakable message. Before the marshals approached, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Vera walked to the microphone, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been 7 months ago. Mr. Volpe destroyed a system that protected my sister's abuser. He sacrificed everything to save a child he didn't know. That's not the action of a criminal. That's the action of someone who finally became the person he needed to be. Then Piper, now 7, healing slowly through twice-weekly therapy, walked to the front. She carried a drawing. A tattooed man kneeling beside a little girl, both surrounded by broken chains rendered in purple crayon. The bailiff moved to redirect her, but the judge raised one hand. Piper approached Silvio's table and slid the drawing across polished wood. At the bottom, in careful letters that showed how hard she'd practiced. You were brave, like my hero. Thank you for not being too late. Silvio's composure maintained through 6 months of testimony, 17 trials, countless prosecutions, shattered completely. He took the drawing with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And in a courtroom packed with cameras and witnesses, Silvio Volpe cried for the brother he'd lost and the child he'd saved. The Federal Corrections Facility in Pennsylvania sat 1,000 miles from Miami's glittering towers and palm-lined corruption. Prisoner Hashite 4762 had adapted to institutional rhythms: early count, law library duty, financial literacy classes he taught twice weekly to inmates preparing for release. Silvio Volpe helped other prisoners draft appeals, explained complex financial documents to men who'd never had bank accounts, and corresponded with children's advocacy organizations that sought his insight into how predators exploit systemic weaknesses. Rebecca Suarez's investigation had won the Pulitzer. Her exposure of corruption networks spanning 6 states triggered legislative reforms nobody thought possible. Piper's Law passed Florida's legislature with bipartisan support, mandating independent review of sealed child abuse cases and automatic investigation when CPS cases closed without documented family interviews. Chief Justice Alistair Cade was serving life without parole in a supermax facility. Senator Rex Thorne had taken a plea deal for 40 years to avoid trial testimony that would have exposed more powerful people. 17 other officials were convicted in related prosecutions: judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, who'd traded children's safety for cash and political leverage. Vera had completed her degree in social work and now directed an advocacy program for trafficking survivors. Piper was thriving in 4th grade. showing teachers the crayon drawing she'd made of the man who saved me whenever they studied heroes in history class. On a humid Wednesday, Detective Anna Phillips, now Deputy Chief of Miami-Dade's Reformed Internal Affairs, sat across the visitation table from Silvio. "Parole hearing in 6 months," she told him. "Federal prosecutors are supporting early release based on your cooperation." Silvio nodded but showed little interest in freedom. 3 years had given him time to process the choice he'd finally made: heart over calculation, vulnerability over control, immediate action over perfect plans. "There's something else." Anna slid a photograph across metal. "Piper at her school science fair, her project about heroes who protect children. First place ribbon. Vera wanted you to know. Piper asks about you constantly. Wanted to visit, but we weren't sure if you wanted that." Silvio studied the photo. "She should forget me. Remember the safety, not the shadows." "She doesn't remember you as a criminal," Anna said quietly. "She remembers you as the person who chose her over everything else. That's the only version that matters to a child." After Anna left, Silvio returned to his cell and pinned Piper's drawing above his bunk, right beside a photograph of Darian taken 2 weeks before he died. His brother smiled in that picture, unbroken, still trusting Silvio would protect him. 3 years of staring at that photograph with guilt. But today, something shifted. He saw forgiveness instead, because this time finally he hadn't been too late. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals become the most unexpected heroes. And sometimes redemption requires destroying everything you built to save the one thing that matters. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you believe that courage isn't the absence of fear but choosing to act despite it, if you believe that some debts can only be paid with everything you have, subscribe and share this story. Comment where you're watching from and tell me, what would you sacrifice to save one innocent life? Only those who've never faced an impossible choice will walk away from that question. Because Silvio Volpe learned what took 20 years and cost him everything. The monsters we fear in shadows are often less dangerous than the systems we trust in daylight. And sometimes, saving one child means becoming the villain in everyone else's story. Hit that subscribe button. Share this everywhere. And remember, you don't need an empire to choose courage. You just need to refuse to look away when it matters most.